Welcome everybody. We'll just wait 1 minute while you all come in and then I'll start formally. Welcome though. Ora, haere mai, nau mai, ki tēnei kōrerorero. Tēnei te mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa. I'm Sheena Gleisner, Executive Director of IPANZ. I gave an introduction to the first webinar, but we have about 100 more people this time, so I think I will need to give a very brief introduction to the series as a whole before I introduce our speakers. As you know, these webinars have been really inspired by a lot of work that's gone before on collaboration. So let's regard this as an ongoing conversation, but we were asked specifically to focus on what is the public service doing to promote collaboration. So these webinars focus entirely upon the core public service as that part of the system, collaboration. And secondarily, we were asked to focus not on the problems, the barriers, the complaints, but instead some practical ideas about some of the shifts that are taking place to contribute to solutions. And of course, there are no simple solutions. That's why I carefully use the word to contribute to solutions. As you know, there are 3 webinars. This is the second one. We're trying to focus particularly on what we call the softer levers here, the relationships, leadership, capability. And we're really incredibly honored to have 3 of the leaders in the public service to talk to us today when we're talking about leadership and capability. The speakers have been asked to think about 3 things. This is not to say each of them will cover everything. They've all got a different perspective to bring. And but the things that they're thinking about is, what is the public service doing or has done to enable better collaboration? What can be done next? What's the next step? And then what are the tricky complexities and trade-offs in managing this and getting this better? So this is how the webinar will run. I will introduce Andrew and then Peter and then Lil. They'll each talk for between 10 and 12 minutes. There won't be questions afterwards. I may put 1 question to each of them afterwards, but the time for all your questions will be when they've finished. And please write your questions. We look at all of them afterwards. And in fact, I've given the 3 C's here a list of all the questions that you asked last time, so they know the sorts of things that you're interested in. But if you have questions, please put them up in the Q&A panel. And also please upvote, because that enables me to put to the speakers the questions that interest most of you. And if you would put comments in the chat function, please go ahead. I'd also just now like to thank Fiona and Sandra, who are helping behind the scenes, without which we couldn't do such wonderfully smooth webinars that we do. So I think without further ado, we will start, and I will start by introducing Andrew. Andrew is the Secretary and Chief Executive of the Ministry of Justice, as you may know, and he was the host CE for the joint venture for family and social violence. And so welcome, Andrew, over to you.
Nā koe, Sheena. E nā hoa mahi kua whakaruika mai nei I runga I te kupapa o te wā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Sheena, for that introduction, and thank you to IPANZ for running these seminars. I agree that they're important. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be on this panel. Let me acknowledge and mihi to Lil and to Peter, who I see as great champions and skilled practitioners in the arts of collaboration. Peter has been doing it in the COVID space at the moment, and that's kind of one of the most ginormous collaborations and joined up efforts that we've known, I think. And Lil, in no less challenging space, doesn't just collaborate and join up across government, but does it with iwi across the entire country and straddles that divide, as well as engaging in a whole lot of other things. So I'm thrilled to be in your company, colleagues, and Sheena, to be working with you on this again. You and I have talked collaboration back decades now, I think. So it's wonderful to be back on a panel with you as well. Look, let me just kick off with noting that jointery matters. Jointery, the collaborative effort, is something that people have called the holy grail of public management, and I think there's a lot of accuracy in that. I think it's really important. I'm going to end up inevitably, much as I try and be focused towards solutions, sounding a bit gloomy from time to time, because one can't avoid but talk about some of the challenges in this space. So let me be clear up front. I am a believer. I think we actually don't serve New Zealanders well without collaborating. The problems that we face frequently can only be dealt with through collaboration. And so, as hard as it is, this is often the only path through to what we need to achieve. So see past the gloominess that you might perceive coming from me. I had a look at my diary in preparing for this and kind of went out a week in either direction, just to get a sense of the collaborative work that I'm working on. Sheena's already mentioned the entity currently known as the Joint Venture for the Elimination of Family Violence and Sexual Violence. It has become one of the first interdepartmental executive boards. We have that legal status now. It'll be formally relaunched as that on the 1st of July. So that's, you spoke at the last webinar, those of you who were here talked about some of the hard wiring. We're one of those new experiments in that space. I also, as Secretary for Justice, chair the Justice Sector Leadership Board, which is also a quite deliberate and quite structured collaborative effort for working together across all of the issues that we face in the justice sector. I work under Peter's leadership as a member of the COVID Chairs Board now, and as I said earlier, I think the COVID effort is one of the most complicated and complex collaborations underway. And then we've just launched, and we're doing quite a lot of work on the National Action Plan Against Racism. So that's, again, something that the Ministry of Justice has the privilege of leading, but it's a national action plan. By definition, it's a collaborative effort. So that's kind of going out just a few days from today. If I go out further, I'll see the policy project, I'll see any number of other instances of collaboration. So I thought I'd kick off mainly by just a little bit of broad context. Why collaborate? What are the sorts of reasons we do it? And there are many. I won't try and make this the authoritative text on it, but we do it to share resources, to share capabilities. We do it to avoid conflicts where work programs might overlap or get in the way of each other. We do it to coordinate decisions. Sometimes we do it to share perspectives. And sometimes we do it to form a collective effort as opposed to an individual effort if we really have to push through some barrier. Why do we go through all of that? Well, often from a New Zealander's perspective, the problems they face don't neatly fit into government agencies. Sometimes they do. If you want to show up to court to organise the payment of a fine, you can probably do that just with my department. But if you're facing so many other issues, if you're grappling through an issue with family violence or family separation, where you've got children, you've got different mixes, you've got all sorts of things going on. If you're looking at economic development type opportunities, any of those things don't relate to the interests of just one department. So from a New Zealander's perspective, the world is a joined up place. From a government's perspective, we have to be able to meet with that. It sounds easy. It sounds like it is so obvious, that people should just do it naturally. But we know that it's hard. The reason why we're having these conversations over decades, frankly, in New Zealand is because it's hard. And so very briefly, why is that? It's because I think influence and control, when you're wanting to get something done, are much harder in a collaborative effort than in a do-it-yourself agency. It's hard enough being a CE of getting your own team to do what you need them to do, to be honest. It's much more complicated when you're trying to reach into another agency and be influential there, where you don't have any direct lines of control. It may be that you have different mismatches of hierarchy and decision-making structures. Even if you can get that right, you've probably got something of a misalignment of objectives. Your collaborator probably doesn't care about this joint thing that you're working on as much as they do about what they're doing for the rest of their day in their own department. The reality is you probably don't as well. So you've got a sense there. The rewards and censures for getting collaborative stuff wrong tend to be weaker, or getting it right tend to be weaker than for the things that are very much in your own bailiwick. They're there, but they matter less. And they matter less in a lot of those quite practical ways. What you are known for as an agency, as a leader, will tend to be the things more often than not that are directly and closely associated, and that's the successes and the failures. Getting alignment of different agencies becomes more difficult the more peripheral the joint activity is to each of those agencies' objectives. Family and sexual violence is like that. You scratch most of us, you'll say one of the most critical, most glaring issues facing New Zealand today is family violence and sexual violence. It's a stain on New Zealand's international reputation and has a huge impact on the lives of whānau all up and down the country. It's actually not owned by anybody in particular. Each of the CEs involved in the board over the joint venture would say this is one of the main things facing New Zealand. When we go back to our office, it's only a little bit of our day. It's in our peripheral vision more than it is in our primary line of sight. And notwithstanding our best endeavours, we've got to actually make a real effort to be seeing those things that are just a little bit off to the side. So in some ways it's hard. Collaboration is costly. The feedback mechanisms are weaker. There are multiple derailers that can go on. It's all sort of exponentially more complicated the more folk that you have out there. So what does that leave us thinking? It's that collaborative work, it's hard. It's seldom the easier road to travel. It's not the natural equilibrium. And so when you go into it, think about it really carefully. Be proportionate with the arrangements that you put in place. It may be the only path to success, but it will take a whole lot of additional effort before you set out on that journey. So I thought I would just touch on three things really in terms of answering this specific question. What are the three things that we need to get better to do to be successful? I'm focusing on the soft side because I know the last webinar was on the hard side. The behavioural culture and those sorts of things. But the first of my three things kind of is a hark back to what would have been spoken about last time, and that's to actually acknowledge that the hard stuff matters for the soft stuff. Everyone will have heard people say, don't worry too much about the form, good people will make a bad structure work. And that's true. Good people, bad people or people that are not committed will certainly undermine a good structure, and a good structure, bad structure can be made to work by good people. But when you're facing the headwinds that you face in collaborative effort, it can be the thing that derails it. So don't just rely on that truism. Why does it matter for culture? Because structures and that hard stuff, they often set the defaults. Behavioural economics, it's many complicated things, but I reckon it kind of boils down to people often taking that which they don't think about. They take the easy path that they don't need to think about. Structures set a lot of those defaults. So let's not undervalue the importance of the hard stuff. entirely because it does influence the soft stuff. It influences all of those decisions that we actually don't think that hard about, and all of those other sorts of micro calls that we make every day. So that would be the first thing that I would say. Yes, the structure is something you need to be thinking about, because it'll set the defaults that a whole lot of other frames, a whole lot of other activity. The second thing I would say is always seek alignment and commitment. Getting alignment is one of the, it's the quintessential challenge of leadership. Often you've got to be getting everyone pointed in the same direction, doing the same things. In your own department, that's the call. In collaborative work, no less so. If you have alignment, decisions are easier, you are inevitably more trusting, the trade-offs are more transparent and obvious to people. Alignment is a prerequisite to building commitment. A couple of ways of building alignment. I kind of think of it as, loosely the Wellington way, and then the out in the community way. The Wellington way, we talk about the strategy, we ask ourselves, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? You go through some quite hard processes to try and work all of that out, and then you sort of design structures underneath that. Last year, in the work in the joint venture for family violence and sexual violence was incredibly tough, because we were going through that high-level alignment process. How do we actually get all of these agencies bringing their work programs to bear? In the end, it got there. This year, it's still hard, but it's a much more straightforward process, because we've got a strategy, Te Aorere Kura, that is giving us that path and that alignment going forward. In the community, it's sometimes much more immediate and more real. We can build alignment by asking, what does the community want? What are the whānau who come to us every day asking? And you talk to people who do collaboration in the regions, they often say, look, we're fine. We can do it together, because we're working with these families and we know what they need, and we just solve problems around there. Where we strike problems is getting back to Wellington. And so if you actually put in all of this together, the magic has got to be, especially in the complex stuff, how do you get that top-down Wellington version of alignment and that bottom-up community-based one? And if you can get the two of them, you're starting to find that sweet spot where you can get some really serious collaboration working. And the third of the kind of 3 points I'd say about you're getting a bit practical, on the face of it, it's just really too obvious to mention. So I'll try and introduce a more kind of subtle thought with it. The too obvious thing is that relationships matter. Now, you all know that. If you have good relationships at the C level, at the senior leadership level, at the working level, with the community, you build trust. You have a basis for communication if you have a relationship. You have more commitment, because you are committed to each other as well as to the kaupapa that you're working on. It's kind of obvious, but that doesn't make it any less true. But the point that I thought I would make about relationships is actually that we shouldn't just think of them as, how do I get Lil to help me with this collaborative thing that we're working on? The bit about relationships that I thought I would highlight, just because it actually goes to, I think, a core truth about collaborative effort, is what do I hear from Lil that she needs for this collaboration? And so that's me as the kind of the host collaborator speaking. What do the other people need? And if they need it, how can I actually shift this collaboration so that it's going to be more in her main line of sight than her side one, that there is more positive feedback going back to the other collaborators. So kind of where I'm going to bring my comments to a close, Sheena, and it's thinking about relationships. Part of it is the listening. The collaborators, the people are owning the collaboration, have to be listening to all of the parties. And why is that? It's so actually that you can evolve the collaboration itself. It has to be dynamic. It can't just be set up to do a thing and expect everybody to come in and do their collaborative thing with it. You have to be evolving the collaboration itself, and always be sensitive to what do the parties need here. How can we make the rational trade-off that they're all making better for them? Where is the success for them in this, the upside for them the payback for all of the parties that are contributing, as well as for meeting the overall kaupapa. So those three things, Sheena, if we're looking forward, it's the hard stuff does matter because it does shape behavioural.
Yep.
The hard stuff shapes the soft stuff, and I think it does it in all sorts of invisible ways every day. We have to seek alignment and commitment. You can be top down, you can be bottom up, but you sure as hell need to be actively doing that. And relationships matter, yes they do, but the bit of relationships that matter that I really want to highlight is the listening bit that the collaboration has to do. You know, you have to listen, you have to have a relationship that's strong enough that you bring in empathy for all of the parties that are involved in it, so that you can, as you need to, evolve the nature of the collaboration itself. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Andrew. That's wonderful. You've got to the heart of so much of it, which is about mindset and the way of thinking and the way of relating that in all of us to change. And I thank you very much indeed. And I won't put more questions now. We've got questions coming up, and I've got quite a lot of questions that were put last time, so I'll come back to them later. Thank you so much. And I will move on to Peter. Peter Mersey is the Chief Executive Ministry of Transport currently, but for those of you who don't know, it was announced yesterday that he's going to be in charge of IRD. I'll ask him all the financial questions when we come to it, but Peter, currently you are seconded to lead the government's COVID-19 response in DPMC, and I suspect that some of that will shape some of your comments. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Sheena. Kia ora tātou na mihi nui kia koutou. It's great to see you all virtually on the screen. Look, Andrew has really set the scene very well. He's talked a lot about the importance of the why, and certainly for me, it's an essential component of good quality policy advice and good quality delivery. And, you know, just to pick a COVID example, we all saw what happened when we went out with the immunisation strategy, the vaccination strategy, and it was really only once we had got really good engagement, grassroots engagement and collaboration with iwi and with Pacific Island community leaders that we really started getting traction in some of the initially harder to reach groups. And I think that should teach us all something. So, Sheena, what I thought would be useful for me to talk a little bit about is I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the concrete things, just building on some of the comments that Andrew's made. And look, these thoughts are not intended to be exclusive or comprehensive, and I don't pretend they always work. And I think that's a point I want to make here is you've sort of got to give it a go. You won't always get it right. Don't let that stop you from keeping going and keeping learning. And I saw one of the comments there was about, you know, how do we learn as we go? And I think I'll come back to a little bit of that, because I think certainly for me with my Ministry of Transport hat, there are some learnings we've got out of COVID, which we need to ensure that we take forward in terms of collaboration. But I guess I'd start by saying, look, at a fundamental level, and this reinforces some of the points that Andrew said, don't go out and look for collaboration unless you have an open mind. You actually have to be prepared to change your view, to be informed, and this is a really important thing for policy in particular, because often we think we know how things are going to work at the middle. And I've got some great examples of where certainly, again, in a transport sense, once we actually went and spoke to people on the ground, we realised that our great design, it was a fantastic design, but it just wasn't going to work in practice. So make sure you've got an open mind and you're prepared to change. Picking up Andrew's point about alignment, agree the collective objective. Now, there are two parts to this. If you're within government, sometimes it's enough to remind people that you're trying to solve a system problem. I'm a big supporter of the system, and I guess I tend to think in system terms. And so for me, leaning in and supporting a solution at the system level is actually personally quite a motivator. So reminding people that they're there at the table, sometimes not necessarily to bring their organisation hat, although they'll clearly bring the information from their organisation, but they're there to find a system solution. Sometimes when you're engaging with the private sector, that's not always the way to get that alignment, but being clear about what the collective objective is. And I'm going to build on that by saying, you can talk about, there's often an agreed problem. And so, starting with that is really important. But ultimately, you do need to build trust. And this was the point that Andrew commented on in terms of those relationships. It is really important that you build a level of trust in that relationship. So invest in the relationships with those individuals. I think in doing that, you will take some risk, okay? You'll take some personal risk because you need to have the confidence to be clear about what is and what is not on the table. Don't set an expectation in those groups that you can't deliver on. If the government has said there are certain things that are out of bounds, explain they're out of bounds. Certainly working with the private sector, while they might be unhappy about something, the clarity about where those boundaries are is very much appreciated. Be prepared to share information. Now, this can be a little uncomfortable at times for public servants because we always want to ensure that we retain the ability for ministers to make decisions in an unconstrained way. But at the same time, if we are really going to provide ministers with good quality advice, with good quality information about how things might be delivered on the ground or with communities, you've got to be prepared to share your thinking sometimes before it's been fully tested with ministers or indeed fully tested internally. And I just think that's a risk that we have to increasingly take as we look forward. And in a leadership sense, that's something you've got to be comfortable with and got to sort of accept. Another point that I just want to emphasise, which Andrew's mentioned, is that point about listening. It's really important that you truly listen. Don't just allow people to talk and then ignore what they say. You really have to listen, and you have to make sure that everyone that you've brought together has an opportunity to contribute. I can give an example around we were doing some work on the clean car discount as part of the emissions package and transport. And as I say, from a policy perspective, we thought we'd come to a very elegant solution. And we got permission from ministers to start engaging with, in this case, it was with industry. So the new car industry, new car importers, and the used car importers. And what we found is those two markets were very different. The way they operated, the sort of the people they were serving, and some of the assumptions we'd made about how the system would work were just simply not going to work on the ground. And I think we were able to get quite a lot of good buy-in and some great information and reshape that package because we were open with them about what some of the bottom lines were. This was not a question of whether this was going to happen, but the question was, how should we best do it to achieve these sort of outcomes and objectives? And, we got really good engagement with both the new vehicle and used vehicle communities. And I think we ended up with a policy that was deliverable as a result. As Sheena and Andrew mentioned, I've been involved in the COVID space. Obviously, transport's been fairly heavily sort of integrated as part of the response to COVID. If you think about the work at the border, when we set up regional borders, the supply chain effects and so on. And this sort of builds off one of the questions I think that was asked at an earlier session. With COVID, we all had a common enemy. And the context in COVID was changing very, very quickly. And often there was an agreed problem. So again, I can give you a good answer. At one point, it became necessary and obvious we were going to put in place a regional border around Auckland. The challenge there was, how do you ensure that the supply chain in and out of Auckland was maintained? Auckland produces a whole lot of things the rest of New Zealand needs, and vice versa, and you need trucks and people to be crossing that border in order to maintain, essential living requirements. And the concern was about how do we do that in a way which contains the risk of at that point, it was Delta spreading outside of Auckland into the nearby regions or wherever for example, the couriers or truck drivers are going. And so the idea was to introduce saliva testing. At that stage, this was a newly approved test, and it hadn't really been rolled out at any scale. And so we went to the trucking community, to their courier community, essentially through a supply chain group that we had set up as in response to COVID, and said, this is our problem. What do we do collectively to make sure that people crossing that border are able to be tested in and out in a non-intrusive way, without having a cotton wool bud shoved right up your nasal passage, which is pretty damn uncomfortable for those of you who've done it. But we had less than a week to develop it and put in place. And one of the things that I found was just amazing was that the industry, because they saw the need, right? They wanted to help us find a solution. And what we actually had was we had competitors in that industry helping each other get access to and distribute the saliva tests and set up collection spots in ways that as a government, we just simply could not have done. And we had that system up and running on day one, so with less than a week's notice. So I think as a result of some of those really intense processes in COVID, we have built some new and very strong relationships, certainly in the transport sector, and I suspect in many parts of government that has occurred. And I think the challenge is, how do we make the most of those relationships going forward to help crack some of those issues? I'll just briefly touch on a couple of other things. Firstly, one of the things that came up in one of the previous conversations was this issue about dealing with your specific portfolio responsibilities in a world where you're needing to collaborate, and how do you do that? Look, to be honest, I call this the grey area. And all of us will manage this a little bit differently. When I'm dealing with ministers, I try not to draw them too much into some of the detail. What's important for them is to make sure that their priorities are being addressed. And I think, part of our responsibility is to ensure that we're able to do that and to contribute to all of government system outcomes. Most ministers will buy that, as it's written on the paper. If you get down to the detail of which analyst is working on what, probably an argument you can never win. So I try not to get down to that level of detail and try and keep some flexibility myself. And I think that's incumbent on us as part of our stewardship responsibilities to do that. So I think it's just about how you manage some of those conversations, the relationships you build with ministers and colleagues. And that comes to my second point, which is really just a comment really, or an observation at the chief executive level. There's been quite an investment in bringing together the chief executives as a team over the past 5 or 6 or 7 years, the public service leadership team. I'm not sure how many CEs there are, 37, 38 that are part of that team. But we've invested quite heavily in building those relationships. And it comes back again to the point that Andrew was making about relationships. The fact that we have those relationships means that when something goes bump in the night, you can pick up the phone and you can have a really good conversation, and we will each lean in to help each other. There's not while some might say, I often think that people would see, there's sort of a degree of patch protection or siloism. I'd have to say, certainly working across my CE colleagues, I do not see that. All I see is people wanting and willing to lean in and help. So that's probably where I'll finish, just with a final comment that I think for me, we individually need to take a bit of responsibility here, because collaboration is about how we each and individually approach this issue, how we lean forward and how we lead into the space. That applies from everyone from chief executive down, and I think that sort of relationship building and collaboration can occur and should occur at all levels. So thank you, Sheena. I'll leave it at this point for some questions for later.
Sure, Peter. Very practical examples. Thank you so much. Scanning the questions, I think you should be prepared when Lil has spoken to talk about guardian angels and whether we're really incentivizing for the right sort of capability in the public service. Are the budget process supporting collaboration? Have we got enough evaluation, learning, and then this important one about the continuity of relationships, that the turnover and the churn in the public service destroys some of the importance of the relationships that you talked about. So be prepared. We'll be asking those, I'm sure. But in the meantime, I turn with always with enormous pleasure to you, Lil. You are Tumu Whakarai of the Te Arawhiti, and you've done wonderful work there, wonderful work with COVID. Now you're working for ANSOG too. I think you're managing to do both, and you're coming to us from Brisbane. And come back often, please. But I'm very pleased that these recording will also go out to ANSOG people, so we'll be able to spread the word wide. So over to you, Lil. Haere mai.
Hei aku rangatira, tātou katoa tēnā koutou. Mihi mai ki tēnei uri no Panguru, no Te Rārua, no Ngāpuhi hoki, no Reire Huama, tēnā tātou katoa. G'day from the Gold Coast, and Andrew and Peter have already made fun of the fact that I have a fan going in the background. I'm not trying to tease you on a cold and horrible Wellington day, but it is really warm over here, and it is not even 9:30. I feel like I'm suffering, but clearly I'm not. It's really great to be here with my two colleagues. As Peter mentioned, we're a tight bunch, and I really miss being around them. Real big ups to you, Sheena, and to IPANZ. This is a really great topic. And so now, I'm the result of a collaboration at the moment sitting here in Australia with the capability journey we are taking in the public service in New Zealand. The Australian public service, all 10 jurisdictions, are looking to take the same journey, and so leaning across the Tasman to help them. And also I think I'll have some things to bring back around collaboration that will hopefully help us on our own journey. When I saw the topic around behavioural and relational shifts, I thought, oh, yep, this is my jam, because collaboration really is a human thing. It's really key to good policy, as Peter's pointed out, good practice, as Andrew's pointed out, good process and good outcomes. So I wanted to start really by talking about what the word collaboration actually means. And at its best, I think, it means the action of working with someone to produce something. Pretty simple. But you know what? There's no judgment in that statement about whether that something needs to be good or whether it needs to be for the benefit of others. I'll come back to that later. At its worst, collaboration means traitorous cooperation with an enemy. Perhaps too strong for application to the public service, but there's also a less venomous meaning, which is collaborating to beat the competition. Still too strong, perhaps? One of the first questions I think we need to ask ourselves as public service leaders is, do we need to collaborate? And my colleagues have touched on this already. Probably not on everything is my answer, and particularly not for the sake of it. You know, sometimes we think, oh, ministers want to see us collaborate, let's collaborate. But is that a real collaboration, or is that something that we're doing because it's the thing to do? I think we also need to think about, when we're leading, what is it our people see of us in our collaboration? So when I collaborate with my colleagues, do my people see someone, a leader, who is working with others to produce something for the benefit of others, the first meaning we give to collaboration? Or are they seeing someone who is doing something to be seen to be winning? So I want to start there. I want to start with motive, because actually motive is one of the key soft behavioural shifts we need to make. What is your motive in collaborating? For me and for anyone, none of us have time to collaborate with no purpose. We have to have purpose, and we have to add value to that collaboration. So for my sakes, for instance, when I collaborate, it has to produce something that is better than was there before. Otherwise, what is the point? You could just I think, waste your own time instead of everyone else's if you're collaborating for reasons other than that. I think for me, and perhaps it's easier because of an agency like Te Arawhiti, I have this really clear view that if my colleagues fail, so do I. And it's a really intrinsic thing that's built into Te Arawhiti. Because we are in the mode of rebuilding relationships, building capability, and working in partnership, but all of those things are to get better outcomes for Māori. Let me give you a practical way of thinking about it. If Andrew and the Ministry of Justice succeed in achieving a safe and just New Zealand, then what better outcomes could an agency like Te Arawhiti hope for? I can also recite my connection to Peter and his agency, and his new agency probably, and for every other agency. Can you do the same? It's a bit like whakapapa. We need to be able to see, to feel, and to live the connection between all of us as public servants, not just when we need it, but always. I've discovered that you never actually know when you're going to need to collaborate. So motive, in my view, is the backbone to collaboration. It must be the thing that stays consistent and drives you to action throughout your collaboration. It's the only way we drop meism and the way we need to try and look good for ministers, or at least look better than those we're collaborating with. I think one of the important things about what I've just touched on is the word connection. That's my second word. So when I started my leadership journey, I made it a point to understand what everybody in the public service did, because I knew that as an agency like Te Arawhiti, I would need them. So I didn't just read their websites, I talked to people in those agencies and really got underneath what it is they want to achieve. So one of the things about collaboration is knowing what is it you are connecting to, what is it you are collaborating with, and why. I think having an understanding of those you wish to collaborate with, as Andrew pointed out, and what your shared purpose is, this is what produces better outcomes. I think understanding each other and agreeing, what is my purpose in collaborating with you? What is it we are trying to achieve? And you cannot just leave the articulation of that purpose as a high-level outcome. You've got to articulate the change you want to make or the thing you want to produce. You need to be able to, I think, say it clearly. So let me give you an example. I can't say to you, I'm going to work with Te Puni Kōkiri because we both work with Māori. That tells you nothing about what the purpose of the collaboration is, why we are collaborating, and how important that collaboration is. A better description might be something like this. Te Puni Kōkiri hold a legislative role in measuring how the system is delivering better outcomes for Māori. Te Arawhiti have a cabinet-directed role of measuring the health of the Māori-Crown relationship. Our shared collaboration, therefore, must surely be about the measurement of the system and its impact on the health and outcomes of the Māori-Crown relationship. That is the clarity that connection offers. We have joined our purposes together and we have come up with a shared statement of what we're going to achieve. That is my third word, achievement. So remember, the first meaning of collaboration was the action of working with someone to produce something. But it had no judgment about whether or not that something needs to be good or for the benefit of others. Our new measurement of achievement through collaboration simply must be to produce something better than we have in order to benefit others. We've shown we can do this, and Peter's referred to this. COVID showed us the power of the three words I've just described. Our motive was to help New Zealanders through one of the worst pandemics in their lives. It was the backbone of everything we did. None of us did anything else for months. Our connection to each other was so strong that we didn't care who delivered the help, whether it was central, whether it was regional, whether it was the agency whose core role it was to deliver it, or actually, if there's someone closer to the ground, give it to them. And boy, did we achieve. Lucky for me, I got to see a lot of that firsthand. Whether it was the IRD and MSD wage subsidy, which rolled out billions of dollars within 30 days, or the way Customs, the Ministry of Transport, protected our borders, whether it was the way we worked with private business, the way we enabled and relied on community to deliver for us. All of this came about as a result of collaboration. So isn't housing or crime or education our next pandemic? So how do we repeat that again in those same set of circumstances? I could talk to you all about the hard levers that the Public Service Act now offers us, but I think Peter is the first to say we don't need those to work together. Our greatest enabler, perhaps, is knowing that we've done it before. And that we can do it again. And we now have these set of digital tools that can help us to reach community a lot better than we normally would. As my colleagues have pointed out to you, there are always barriers and challenges. Would I name a few? Sure, mandate. What's my mandate to do this? Is it the same as their mandate? Is my mandate greater than their mandate? What are the accountabilities I hold for delivery of this? What is their accountability? Do we have the money? Do we have the people? But I think many of you that know me know that when I'm motivated, barriers don't usually stop me. And I encourage you to think about how you overcome those barriers. And motivation has got to be the place that it starts. I think understanding that we all fail if I fail, understanding that we have to help each other succeed, knowing that collaboration doesn't require you to give something up. Actually, it asks you to add something into a common basket. It doesn't always mean you agree with each other. I argue a lot when I collaborate. It's very healthy, I think. It's the beauty of it. It means that you have to work hard to understand each other's challenges. I have to understand Andrew's challenges. I have to understand Peter's. I also have to know when it's time to compromise. And sometimes we compromise a little bit too late. We compromise when our ministers make us compromise. And we need to think about that a bit earlier. And I think looking for joint solutions. I think, you know, if we keep going back to motivation, it is that point that keeps you going through that collaboration through all of those challenges. I wanted to end on the collaboration that has given me the greatest joy lately. And given that we're close to the celebration of Matariki, it really was one of the most enjoyable collaborations we've had. And we had Envy because they had the Holidays Act. We had the Ministry of Education who are producing resources for our tamariki. We had the Ministry for Culture and Heritage who are administering the Act now. And we have communities who are designing their own celebration of the holiday. And Te Arawhiti's role was to work with, from the establishment, with all of the experts in Mātauranga Māori who drove everything we did. That is a collaboration that will see the first holiday of Matariki celebrated on the 24th of June. Well, for you anyway. I'll try and get a day off over here and I'll say I need to celebrate Matariki. I think it's just, as I close, a time to reflect, perhaps, on our own collaborative efforts, on our own collaborative behaviours, and to think about how we might approach collaborations better and dream of what future collaborations might achieve for New Zealanders. And those collaborations, in my view, are not just within the public service. They're with community, they're with iwi, they're with business. They might even be trans-Tasman, who knows? It's been great to talk to you today, and I'll hand back to you, Sheena. Nō reira, tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, Lil, if we can get all those thoughts about what we could do if we empower ourselves and motivate ourselves, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to the key questions, and any of you can answer. Perhaps if all of you answer, it'll be difficult. So just jump in, and I'll go to one or two of you. The first one is, how do we ensure we learn from the collaboration that's occurred previously? The implication is that we're not actually learning, we're not evaluating, which has come up before, and applying it. Can anybody reassure us?
I picked Peter and Andrew.
Okay.
Look, I saw a question there that said, yeah, we don't seem to be learning. And I think that's a little bit of a harsh assessment. We actually do quite a lot of conversation about what has gone before when we're setting things up. We spend a fair amount of time interrogating, and I think it's really important. And you transmit learning through having people that have been involved. You bring them back through the evaluations that have been done either by ourselves or by externals. The Auditor General did actually a really powerful evaluation of the joint venture for family violence and sexual violence, and that is a resource not only for us involved in that, but for others, and we're using it in other collaborative places. So look, I think the question is it felt a little, it had a judgment in it that we're not learning, I think is a little hard. I guess I would come back to the fact that every collaboration is different. I think we probably underestimate how many ways there are to fail, if I can put it rather dismally. And it will be different things that derail us at different times. So you need to have the core understandings of what it takes to make these things work, and to be building in. Actually, the changes that are built into the Public Service Act, they represent the learnings of all of a whole lot of those other things from over the years, and they are all attempts to try and line up a whole lot of the levers that we can actually manage. So I agree, it's really important. We have to do it. I think we try, but collaboration, no matter how much you've learned from the past, will be difficult in new ways as you do it in the future, because that's just the nature of the beast.
Thank you. That was a suitably both defending a little bit and being positive. Thank you, Andrew. Do you want to add anything, Peter?
No, Sheena, look, if you like, I might just have a quick crack at a couple of the other questions that have come up in a sort of a rapid fire sense. Someone commented about whether the budget is an inhibitor. My view is it's not really. Look, the budget's a framework, the appropriations are a framework. Frankly, where it's necessary, you can find ways to make it work. So I wouldn't see that as a particular barrier. Someone, I think it was Ellie, asked a question about collaboration with CRAN entities. But my view on this, and it sort of feeds into some of the stuff that Andrew will have spoken about, certainly in the Ministry of Transport, the way I approach our engagement with CRAN entities is if they fail, we fail. And if they're successful, we're successful. And I think if you bring that frame, not just to those relationships, but actually to the collaboration that we're talking about here. So where it's genuine collaboration, where there's genuinely an issue to resolve, success is what both parties should want to achieve. And so a lot of it's a mindset. And the third thing I comment on is sort of the guardian angel thing. Look, I think at a CE level, speaking for myself, I suspect that I would like my people and my agency to take more risk in this space than I think they think I want. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sounds like a Monty Python skit. And so it's how do we give comfort to people that we do want them out there, and that we will give them some support and protection if for some reason it doesn't quite work out. So I think there's something there about the conversations we have internally and the posture and the culture we create.
That's very, very important. Thank you, Peter. You didn't cover something which I will go to. Might start with Lil here. It's about the relationships, the importance of relationships to enable collaboration. And I must say, I worry a lot about the amount of turnover and restructuring, and Derek talked about it last time, and how systems, as the person here asking, systems like this take a long time, relationships have to endure a long time. So building on that, they actually say what effective handover look like to maintain improved relations over time. Lil, I'll start with you here, and then I'll come on, just jump in, you others.
Can I just acknowledge that that is quite an issue? And, you know, I think about some of our recent collaborations, and if there wasn't a key person from my organisation who was there and I had somebody else there, you know, I don't know if that collaboration would have gone the same. In saying that, you know, I think Peter's hit on the key, which is actually the scaffolding of your organisation needs to provide for whoever is sitting at that table to take that same culture, to take that same, I think, point of view. What I think, and you know, you do go back to building relationships is a human thing. It's got nothing to do with structure. It's all about how you want to work with someone, how you want to, I think, understand and utilise these skills. And if you provide infrastructure around collaboration that says our organisation's culture, when we collaborate, is to have the right motives, is to ensure that we're connecting with their purpose, not just our own, and to be, I think, always there. You know, we always call ourselves the hand in the small of your back. And I think part of that is about always being there to catch things if you need to. Everyone in a collaboration needs to be ready to do that. And how you prepare your people for an environment like that is to build a culture that does that internally. So I think it's a really, really big issue for us. Churn makes collaboration with iwi quite difficult. So we have a really good system of ensuring that one person doesn't hold all the relationships, that they are shared across a team of people. And so starting to build that now is going to be really important.
Thank you, Lil. Peter and Andrew, you might like to add something to that issue of relationships or add something else. Peter?
I'd just like to say, I mean, I think the other thing is if someone is leaving and they have a set of relationships, you know, we expect people to do handover notes when they're departing. They should actually set up meetings and do a handover of the relationship and introduction and so on. The private sector are very good at that. For those of you who've engaged with the private sector, if someone is moving on, even if it's to a different role, they will set up a relationship meeting and introduce the new person. We don't seem to do that for some reason, as much as we should. Thanks, Sina.
Thank you. Andrew? Yep.
I agree.
Okay, the one that's at top of the list now is really the issue of how do you make sure we're not at cross purposes with stakeholders when they're thinking it's about devolution of resources and decision making, and really it's only information sharing that's on the table. Peter.
Perhaps I'll just start that by saying, I mean, look, coming back to something I said earlier, you've got to be really clear about, and Lil made this point too, be really clear about whether you're consulting, whether you're engaging, whether you're simply passing information. I know within the Ministry of Transport, the team had set up a series of meetings with a number of iwi groups around a change to the Civil Aviation Act. And when I looked at it, we weren't actually consulting on anything. It was just information provision. So we were using the wrong mechanism. So getting clarity, you don't want them to think that there's something out there for them that you can't deliver. Be really clear. And if that's the rationale for a collaboration, great. And if it's not, and if it's about information, great. Just be upfront. Have the courage to be upfront.
Yeah, you know, one of the skills and capability that we are learning as a public service is it is a real capability to manage expectations and to be, it shouldn't be a skill, but to be honest. I think we've had this view for a long time that working with iwi requires us to say yes all the time. Or working with anyone requires us to say yes. I can tell you most of my collaboration with iwi, my word is no. And I get wheeled in to be the no person a lot, and you know that garners great respect, and it garners, I think, trust that you are being open. And so I'm seeing some examples across the public service where we're pretending it's something and it's actually not, and I think those are the things that start to detract from relationships. And you know, let's not try and pretend it's devolution if all we're doing is informing.
Thank you.
Can I add one thing to that? I completely agree with everything Peter and Lil have just said. You've got to be honest, straightforward and clear, and don't pretend you're something you're not. I think, though, we probably underestimate quite how far we can take some of these relationships. I think there's untapped potential in what we can do together. So whilst we should be clear about where the boundaries are, we should also be open to moving those boundaries. You know, in my role, we have this quite complex relationship with the judiciary. We've worked really hard to actually move the boundaries of that. And, you know, we are now, they and us talk about a partnership, which is not a word that was really used previously. And that's because there's give and take, and you're actually exploring together, you know, within, in that case, the constitutional constraints you have, but you're still exploring together, what can we do together and how can we take it forward. And with Crown entities, with iwi, with NGOs, actually, yeah, in the family and sexual violence space, we're working really hard to see how far we can actually push those boundaries out so that we are giving up more control. It completely reinforces actually the points Peter and Lil make. Be honest and upfront about how you're doing that. And just what I'm adding to is also be a bit innovative and open, and let's try and shift some of those boundaries further.
Thank you so much. You all three in your different ways are saying, actually, we can, with the right leadership and with the right culture, go much further towards greater collaboration. And that is a really reassuring note to end on. And I'm sure all you three will indeed create the cultures to do that. And I hope everybody does. So I do need to stop because we're coming up to the hour. We do record these. They go out very, very widely. Thank you so much. There's an immense amount of wisdom that you've shared and generosity and aroha, I think, in fact. I just want to say to the audience, the last webinar will come next week. The question that somebody put about co-governance, I think will be covered then, as Chapi Tikani will be with us. We've got the Productivity Commission back with the fantastic work they did on effective social services. And then we've got somebody working absolutely at the front line in the police in South Auckland, who's got lots of ideas about what she has seen working and could even work better for the public service. So it'll be more of a social a focus on the social services next time. So I just want to thank you all so much. I could listen to you for hours. Next time we'll have a 3-hour-long webinar. Is that okay? Thank you very much.
You might have a few fewer takers, I think, Sheena.
Thank you so much. No reira, haere rā.